Before the Rings of Power, there were the Silmarils. Before Sauron, there was his master Morgoth. Before Aragorn and Arwen, there was Beren and Luthien. Join us as we explore Tolkien and all the ages of Middle-earth with your hosts from theonering.com, Jonathan Watson, Michael Grumbine, and Dan Coates.
All right, everybody. So let me apologize for the last few weeks where we haven't been talking about the Silmarillion. So this week we are unforgivable. It is completely, we will hang our heads in shame and go pay penance to whatever. So we are finally back at the Silmarillion, the last full chapter in the book of the Rings of Power in the Third Age. And this week we're going to go through the first in my copy, the first 10 pages or so, right up until... right up till the point at which they start talking about the Third Age, right? It put the end of the, where Narsil is broken, the ring is cut off Sauron's hand, and where that thus begins the Third Age. So we're going to go to that point.
So first there was this little opening about the age before the First Age, all the ages before the First Age. That was a small number of pages. Then we've been for hundreds of pages talking about the First Age. And now in one episode, we're going to cover all the Second Age.
I know, right?
From the end of the...
I mean, we did for the Calibeth. That was the Second Age too.
Okay, fair enough.
But Second Age Middle-earth, we got 10 pages of it essentially. And that's it. Yep. It's kind of like we're back into the Ainulindalë or something.
Exactly, and I say that because we're drawn back to the beginning to the end of the battle. We're drawn back to the beginning of the Second Age in the first two paragraphs of this chapter.
Yeah, so we're going to jump into that. We're also going to have our extended podcast for all of our wonderful members, of which you can become one. Our podcast is about 20 minutes, 30 minutes longer each time. We also have our Discord chat, which is a lot of fun. We've got a few new people in there this week. We've been asking questions of the interviewees that we've been having lately, as long as their internet works. That was a thing. But we'll improve that. Yeah, so become a member. It's $4 a month. First month is free, so you can check it out without worrying about anything. And the conversations are great. And we're doing a book club again tomorrow night, which is actually it'll be the last Thursday night after this goes live.
In the past. Yeah.
In the past. So we're reading.
So for those of you that are like, oh, I want to join the book club. Too late.
Yeah. Well, just catch up. We're only 100 pages in. You can do that in a night if you really hunker down. Join us there. And we're also going to be doing our live stream the next Friday. So on Friday, June 16th. 7, 8, 9. Yeah, June 16th, we'll be doing our next live stream, 9 p.m. Eastern, as long as I get my time right this time, because I was all screwed up last time. But yeah, go to theonering.com/member to join, and you can see everything, how all the sausages are made.
Well, apparently for these live streams with lots of podcasters, it's kind of a thing to be late.
Oh,
they all seem to start late. Yeah.
Okay, good. Then I'll be more late next time.
No,
I won't
that
care
wasn't
as
what
much.
I meant.
Oh,
no.
So you're not saying the more late I am, the better this live stream goes?
No. No. Wrong lines. You did not read between the lines.
All right. So, hey, let's just jump right in to Of the Rings of Power and the Third Age, where we start right at the beginning of the Second Age. And I love how Tolkien even says, in which these tales come to their end. I'm like, oh, when I got to that the first time, I was like, oh no, it's coming. It's over. It's truly over. The entire history of Middle-earth is over after this.
Did you get a member berries feeling like when you were finishing the Return of the King? It's like, oh no, it's all coming to an end again.
Yeah, it all felt like it.
And this is the segment in which our dear listeners will hear a thing never heard before. I'm not just that I'm usurping Dan's big thought, or maybe I'm not. Maybe there's a big thought coming afterwards that I don't know about.
Wait. You're right. This is now Michael's big thought. So we have to throw this in somehow.
Dan's big thought.
For Michael.
Hold on now, Dan. Record scratch. Michael's big thought. This time it's Michael's big thought. Because Michael is going to do a thing never before done on this podcast. Michael is going to defend the Rings of Power. And not just the Rings of Power, but the writing, not just a random moment that Michael's like, that was kind of cool, which happened a few times over the 8 hours but of Rings of Power, but an actual plot thread, in fact, one of the structural plot threads. So Michael's going to defend it. And to defend it, Michael is going to start, as one always should in these discussions, with the text itself. So let's read from the Silmarillion. Yes, I know Amazon didn't have rights to the Silmarillion, but we also know that at least some of them had read the Silmarillion before. At least I hope so. All right, here's the quote. And it's a bit long. It's a little bit of a paragraph, but we have to understand it. When Thangorodrim was broken and Morgoth overthrown, Sauron put on his fair hue again and did obeisance to Eonwe, the herald of Manwe, and abjured all his evil deeds. And some hold that this was not at first falsely done, but that Sauron in truth repented, if only out of fear, being dismayed by the fall of Morgoth and the great wrath of the lords of the West. But it was not within the power of Eonwe to pardon those of his own order. I'll stop there a second. His own order means the Maiar. So Eonwe is a Maiar, and so is Sauron. And he commanded Sauron to return to Aman and there receive the judgment of Manwe. Then Sauron was ashamed, and he was unwilling to return in humiliation and to receive from the Valar a sentence, it might be, of long servitude in proof of his good faith, for under Morgoth his power had been great. Therefore, when Eonwe departed, he hid himself in Middle-earth, and he fell back into evil, for the bonds that Morgoth had laid upon him were very strong. All right, so here's my defense. Mm-hmm. If I was a writer, and I was to... we were deciding in a writer's room how to portray Sauron at first in the Rings of Power. I'm looking at this sentence. Sauron put on his fair hue again and did obeisance to Eonwe. So the idea that Sauron would not look like a towering evil but look fair is believable. Then furthermore, that he actually repented and that he was told to appear before the Valar to receive the judgment. Now we know as well from the book, not just from Rings of Power, that the way to Aman, to the Valar, to back to Aman, is on a ship traveling to the west. So he would have had to do that in order to gain repentance. So one way to take this and spin it, you could have a fair-looking Sauron, and he could be on a ship on his way to the west, looking, and then decide at the last moment or somewhere along the way that it wasn't in him, and he could not, in his shame, he could not submit himself in the humiliation, and therefore decide to return to Middle-earth. And so you could see, and now under this reading, he would be probably part of the cause of the destruction of his ship, or he would try to flee on a boat or something like that. But it is actually believable that a fair-looking Sauron could be heading on a boat into the west, following the end of the first age. Now, this is not defensible according to the Sauron with the works found in the north, but you could say that happened during the first age, and I'm talking about the ice castle and the troll and all the altar they found and all that stuff that they made up. So, but a fair-looking Sauron, a Halbro, as we lovingly refer to him during our reviews, could in fact be Sauron. It's not unbelievable, and he could have been on a boat heading to the west, following his obeisance to Eonwe. So there you go, the Rings of Power writing in that one plot point. Now, there's another plot point that goes along with it, which is the forgive my language, the dumbass love affair between Galadriel and Sauron. That's not defensible. That's ridiculous. Yes. And we will talk more about that in our subscriber section for those of you that want to hear about why that relationship between Galadriel and Sauron is a thing that cannot be borne by Tolkien fans. But in this one point about Halbro being Sauron and about him being found on a boat out in the Western Seas, actually defensible. There we go. Tear it down, sirs.
So Michael Grumbine likes the Rings of Power. That's what I got from that.
So I'm glad we're finishing the Silmarillion because you're not invited back.
Man. So under that reading, you would say that perhaps Sauron called that monster, that sea monster, to destroy the boat, to keep it from making the end of its journey.
Could be. Also, the sea monster, since I'm just playing along with this, I'm just going to go with it to the hill. The sea monster could have been actually Ase or Olmo, after he decides against repentance and he tries to flee back, coming to send a monster of the deep to destroy the boat as part of a kind of final move in the battle. That just, in other words, to complete the punishment due to all the servants of Morgoth. So could be that, or it could be a rando, as we former Dungeons and Dragons players might say, a random encounter. Could have been that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
There's a lot of
interesting.
there's a lot of could be's, and it might have in this entire defense of the Rings of Power. That'd be like me finding, I don't know, a really good looking peanut butter and jelly sandwich on the counter, and I see my 6-year-old kid there, and I'm like, it could be that he made that one, but I know better that he didn't actually make that. That it's not spread all over the table and there's messes everywhere. It's actually my wife who did that. So I don't know, the whole idea that you're throwing out. I mean, sure, it could be, but also the timeline, if we held to the timeline is way off, because at this point, it's somewhere in the middle of the Second Age, right? Numenor is well established. There's no chance that at this point in Tolkien's timeline that Sauron was still a good guy this late in the Second Age. And
chronology, somology.
Sauron would know that he can't take just any boat into to take the straight path to Valinor. It's not possible, right? And plus, he's a Maiar. If he would really truly repented, he would be able to contact who he needed to contact in order to get to Valinor in whatever way is possible, whether it's Gil-galad, whether it's Círdan, right? Whether it's Eonwë again. So the whole idea that he's on some boat, which, of course, here's the other thing, is like, it could have been done, but the execution in the Rings of Power was so clumsy and ill thought that it didn't matter if the story was great. It was so poorly executed that I couldn't take it seriously. Like, they never explained any. If they would have tried to at least explain a little bit about why he was on a boat in the middle of an ocean away from everybody else, that would have made more sense. If they would have said, like, even at that point, right, he was following Galadriel and he knew he was going to be out there, and so the boat that he was on was secretly trailing all of the elven ships because they wanted to get there, right? They could have done something with what the men were trying to do to get to Valinor. Some of the, people from Numenor who desired to see the Undying Lands, and he was hitching a ride and trying to push them there and following Galadriel because they wanted to go there too. Something like that, but they didn't even try. They don't explain anything, just assume. And so
that's very true, and I can't defend anything past that. My tolerance for defense of Rings of Power has ended 5 minutes ago, so I'm not going to. I won't continue. But I do think it is interesting that there's this fair. I had forgotten about that there was a period of time when Sauron appeared fair again, and probably repented, at least out of fear, as it says, and was given the opportunity to return to Valinor.
Yeah, I mean, if they do, they dive into this. They dive into those 3 sentences so deeply that it defines the entire show. And then, of course, like you mentioned, is they take his fair appearance, and it means that he and Galadriel were going to be an item. That's 21st century Americanism, where we think that everyone look, they both look like supermodels, therefore they're hot for each other. So that's I can see that, and they also dive into the whole idea, all right, because hobbits are mentioned in this chapter here. They were like, okay, we're going to throw halflings back into it, and they take specific sentences and they amplify them to such a degree that it doesn't resemble what it originally meant anyway. And in this, it's sort of, it's the instant regret a child has after, like an evil child has after hurting somebody, like, oh, I didn't mean to do that, and like, whatever, I'm fine. It's that moment of like, oh wow, that was really bad, but their human nature takes over and they don't care in the end anyway, because it's all about me. It's like, well, he told me that he didn't love me anymore, and so I pushed him as hard as I could and he fell down the stairs and cracked his head open. But it's his fault, not mine, right? Yeah. It's that regret, but then they come back to defending themselves. That's what I think Sauron had more than anything else.
Yeah, I was disciplining my daughter the other day. We were at the shopping mall and she wanted some candy, so we're in the process of buying the candy, and I turn around and her cheeks are all, I'm like, what's in your mouth? And she had taken candy and shoved candy. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And so she stole from the store, and so I had to discipline her. But so then afterwards, it was like she was telling me, "Yeah, now I feel bad." And I go, "Well, that's good. You should feel bad." And she goes, "Yeah, I feel bad that you're not giving me any candy."
Ooh, wow. But remember,
so that's the 5-year-old response to being caught and being punished.
If we could all be as angelic as those wonderful children, like just go back to the innocence of children.
Sure. Yeah. Says nobody who has lots of children.
I didn't teach her that. I could tell you.
Right. Yeah. The basest form of mankind comes out in the 5-year-old who wants candy.
It is funny that the children are like this extreme of, they do have an innocence, and they do have this need to be utterly protected, and they're in one sense the most precious part of the human society, and in another sense they're totally debased. And if any adult acted like a 2-year-old, we would lock them up and either an insane asylum or in solitary.
And isn't that, like, when you think about like the worst parts of us, it's the parts that are self-centered and power hungry, meaning that it's all about me and it's all about what I want, and to hell with whatever anybody else wants. And the worst people in the world, that's essentially they're a child taken to the worst possible degree, like Sauron, right? He had a taste of power under Morgoth, and now he just wants it back. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. Like, everybody else is the problem. You're not worshiping me. That's not my fault. That's your fault, right? And so
that's right.
They take that base nature of childhood, and they never learn that, they should have been singing with the others rather than breaking the melody.
Good point.
Yeah,
I like it.
Okay, well, let's move on from the Rings of Power, because what Tolkien wrote is much better anyway.
So thankfully, he then does only 4 paragraphs, or 5 or 6 throughout the whole book, but of exposition of geography, unlike the previous age in which we got a whole chapter of Beleriand. So we get an exposition of the realms, essentially, of the elves in the new Middle-earth, because he tells us, and I quote, "In the great battle and the tumults of the fall of Thangorodrim, there were mighty convulsions in the earth, and Beleriand was broken and laid waste, and northward and westwards many lands sank beneath the waters of the great sea." So basically, what used to be a far inland range of mountains, the arid Luine, becomes now the coastal mountains. So everything else gets sunk under the ocean. We've thrown up the map before of Beleriand under the waves, and the New Age. But all the maps of Middle-earth that we are used to, and in fact is even the background of our podcast, are now we finally come to the maps that we're all familiar with. Only, in my edition, 295 pages into the Silmarillion. Now we finally have Middle-earth as everyone is used to seeing it. And he makes a quick tour through Middle-earth, specifically the kingdoms of the elves and the men. Namely, he talks about I know we're going to go into some details, but he talks about the rise of Sauron and the creation of the Rings of Power, which we're going to talk about. But then he eventually then also gives us a little exposition on the geography of the Dunedain, of the men of Numenor who survive the cataclysm and come to Middle-earth and establish kingdoms. So we do get some geography interspersed in this, but at a very reasonable level, to my mind. How did you find it, Dan? Since this was your first read through.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. It definitely fills in all the gaps. When you just read Lord of the Rings, you kind of have all these gaps in your understanding of, like, you kind of know that there was a Northern Kingdom, but you don't know its connection to Gondor, or why it's in ruins now and Gondor's still there. It kind of sets up the chessboard, I guess, the way the Silmarillion kind of set up the chessboard over and over again for the First Age, where it's like, here's all the elf kingdoms, here's the men come from the east, and now the men and the elves are living together, and it kind of sets everything up, and then you have all these big battles that happen. This chapter, at least the first 10 pages, it really sets up through the Second Age why the map looks the way it does. Where the kingdoms were, why these big towers were built. You have Barad-dûr and Minas Ithil and Minas Arnor. So you kind of understand the Numenorians came here, and this is why these kingdoms are the way they are. So I think it did a really good job. It also sets up, Sauron, his plan. He's trying to deceive everybody, and it's really interesting that he has the same criticism that that you did of the Valar, Michael. Hey, the Valar, they're not doing anything. Middle Earth is in ruins, and the Valar, they're just hanging out, not doing anything. So it's, I think Tolkien's word is, in the pride of his heart, he thinks like, hey, I'm Sauron. I can fix this. I can make this the way it should be. So I thought that was a really interesting motivation for a bad guy. He's like, I just want order. I want things to be the way they're supposed to be. Oh, I also want everyone else to bow down and worship me, but
Right.
you know, I can fix this and I can make it the way it should be.
Right. Exactly. They're what does it say? A mask this is Sauron, could wear so that if he wished he might deceive the eyes of men, seeming to them wise and fair. But he ruled rather by force and fear, if they might avail, and those who perceived his shadow spreading over the world called him the Dark Lord and named him the enemy. So yeah, he could even draw people by wisdom and appearing fair, but he chose fear. He chose force. And that's what I mean, in that way, he's reflecting again Morgoth. Although he takes a more direct hand, he doesn't never leave his citadel once he establishes it. He's a little more active than Morgoth is in that regard. So, but before that all happens, there is, in fact, the title of this chapter and the title of the Amazon series, The Forging of the Rings of Power. So these Rings of Power. Surprised I was to notice this time that actually, upon a careful read, the elves made all of them except one. 18 of the 19 Rings of Power were made by the elves, not by Sauron. I had originally thought Sauron made the 9, and I don't know why I thought that. Maybe it's in an unfinished tale somewhere or something. But anyway, I'll just blame my bad memory on it. But it's from this text anyway. In these final version of the notes that Christopher Tolkien publishes of his father's work, it is the elves that make all of the Rings of Power except for the one, and then Sauron takes the other 18. Well, right. 15 of the 18.
Yeah, he loses 3. Well, yes, but and some of the dwarven rings were lost, I think, too. I think he only got
but he takes 15 by force
to and then hands them out. Yes, right,
and hands them out.
Yeah. So, and this is, I mean, to go back, this is your defense of the Rings of Power in the beginning, right? Here it says that the 3 wings were made last. The 3 elven rings were made last. And what happens in the Rings of Power? The clear and obvious thing is to make those last, but no, they make them first. Yeah. And now we wonder, like, well, how does Sauron influence the other 15 rings that are necessary, 16 rings that are necessary to be made?
Well, the answer is he doesn't. The Rings of Power have written themselves into a corner because they can't. He can't, like, they know it's Sauron now. So obviously no elf is going to make the other. And I said 18 of 19. I meant 19 of 20. No elves are going to make the other 16 rings that are necessary. Yeah. That Sauron later on steals by force in the war with the elves of Eregion. So that's all. It's all a total mess and mishmash, because the whole point, and we're going to talk more about this too, but I'm going to read a quote about the elves of Eregion. Actually, I'm going to read 2 things. Eregion, only in Eregion, which men call Hollin, did elves of Noldorin race establish a lasting realm beyond the arid Luin. So the only place that the Noldor settled in this new land, because the Noldor were all over the place in Beleriand, as we have covered. But the only place they settle here is in Eregion, the land of the ringsmith. And now I'm skipping a bunch of paragraphs, and I'm going to read. It was in Eregion that the counsels of Sauron were most gladly received, for in that land the Noldor desired ever to increase the skill and subtlety of their works. So this is Sauron when he's under the guise of Anatar. They don't know it's Sauron. Gil-galad and Elrond won't let him into the kingdom of Lindon, but he is accepted by Celebrimbor and his people into the other Noldor, the Noldor in Eregion, and influences all their work in the creation. And they made many rings, not just the 16 that were eventually taken. Those were just the greatest.
He didn't influence them; he coaxed them.
Right.
Dan, you got it. Good job. All
I
right.
got it. Yeah.
Sorry, it's so easy, man. Every time you coax the race.
Yeah.
Okay.
And coaxing means like letting go and letting it
Gently.
drop into the gravity, just which acts exactly the same no matter whether you throw it. Yeah, the thunder in the background is a South Carolina thunderstorm, so
that's all
apologize.
right.
Oh, wow.
You can't really hear him.
Good.
Okay, so so Sauron, right? We left off at you were mentioning that the Celebrimbor agreed to let Anatar essentially help him. Anatar, the name of Sauron, taking on a falsely fair form. Even though Gil-galad, they wouldn't even let him into the realm. They're like, no. There's something creepy about you. You've got those weird new Apple Vision eyes that aren't quite right.
That's right. You got to imagine, like, what did they think? This is Gil-galad and Elrond. These are two of the wisest elves that yet in existence in Middle Earth that are still living in Middle Earth. Who did they think he was? They're like, you look like an elf. Probably, almost definitely, he looks like an elf.
Yeah, but he's a man looking in. Well,
is he a man looking?
Well, sorry, in the Rings of Power, he's a man. He's not an elf.
Well, I've given up my defense.
Okay,
we're done. That was just the first 5 minutes, dude. That was just
man.
For our opening.
You've opened a wound here, and I'm gonna have to throw some
it's all
cauterization on it.
But Anatar, think about Anatar. Since the Rings of Power was too stupid to do this, think about Anatar and how he would appear. I mean, actually, going back to a game that I love to hate, which is Shadow of Mordor, and their games, they present him as a fairly in flashbacks and things, in some spiritual looking scenes, as an elf of power and beauty, and which is what he. But now think about this though: Gil-galad and Elrond in the Kingdom of Lindon. They know there's something wrong with this guy, but what do they think he is? Like, okay, there's only a certain number of things. He's not a man. He looks like an elf. They know all the elves of power. It's not like there's millions of them in the world. So who do they think he is? Maybe a Maiar in form, in some other form, maybe, but maybe not.
Yeah.
You got to wonder, what was their theory? And they have a long time to think about it.
And I'm sure he had a hard time coming up with a really good reason of what he was to them. And so they're like,
right.
we don't think it's a good idea for you to come any closer.
Build the wall. The border is closed. No southern border for us.
So do you think that he's coming to them under a guise where they don't recognize him as Sauron, or is it to the point where they go, even if it is Sauron, who cares? He's helping us and he's giving us all his knowledge and gifts. Maybe he's repentant. Is it that they truly don't see him for who he is?
They do not.
Or does he just seem like he's a good guy now?
Yeah, I don't think they see him for that he's Sauron.
Well, it says, and though they knew not who in truth he was, they would not admit him to the land. So that was in Lindon, but in Eregion, are they just going, maybe he's a good guy now, maybe he's turned a corner?
I see. You're asking about Eregion.
Okay.
So
I'm sorry. Yeah.
It tells us the reason why they accepted him. It was kind of one of those things where, here's a gift giver. Should we be suspicious? We're all Noldor. We're not stupid. Yes, we should be suspicious of him. Our High King in the other kingdom, Lindon, is suspicious of him. Won't even let him in his land. But here he is, and he has all this candy. Man, this candy tastes good. And what is candy to the Noldor? And I quote.
He's pulling up in the van without the windows.
Yep, the white van.
Candy.
Yep.
Kids, get in the car. There's candy.
Spray painted, except instead of candy, this is free rings across, spray painted across the van. Therefore, this is the elves of Eregion. Therefore, they hearkened to Sauron, and they learned of him many things, for his knowledge was great. In those days, the smiths of Austin Ethiel. That's the city in the middle of Eregion. We actually get a shot of that a number of times in Rings of Power. So the smiths of Austin Ethiel surpassed all that they had contrived before, and they took thought, and they made rings of power. So there it is. There's the sentence. When the rings of power are made, there it is, the elves of Eregion. But Sauron guided their labors, and he was aware of all that they did, for his desire was to set a bond upon the elves and to bring them under his vigilance. So what's the candy to the Noldor? it's this knowledge of how to craft rings of power, how to craft things of power and beauty. That's what's their weakness. And that's why the elves of Eregion, the Noldor, let's be clear, this is the Noldor, the highest of the elves in Middle-earth.
Yeah.
They fell to Sauron in the only kingdom they had in Middle-earth. They fell to Sauron because of their overweening desire for craft, for creation of things of beauty and power. So very, very fascinating and enlightening about the weakness, the Achilles heel of elves.
So let me ask a question about, like, why is it that is what is the Achilles heel of elves? Is it because that they are tied to the world, to the earth, to Middle Earth, to the land that Iluvatar created, including the lightning behind Michael? That was impressive. The thunder, and so, you know, their desire to create beauty in the world is, you know, it is the thing that gives them purpose, right? Like, to create beauty that is world made is greater than finding peace in the direction of your life because it's got a limit to it, right? Is that it? I don't know. Does that make sense? Am I asking the right question here? That is conveying my idea, my thought.
I think it's a good question. I don't know what Dan's thought is. I have some thoughts, but I do think that's part. You've put your finger on, I think, a really important part of it, which is that the elves, all that their entire nature is encompassed within Arda. Mm-hmm. They have no fate outside of Arda we're only given a hint of this once or maybe twice, that there's a fate after the final battle at the end of time. But until then, everything they are and everything that is exists within the bounds of Arda. So they have a connection with the land of Arda and a love of the things of beauty in Arda far beyond that of anyone else, which is why when an elf creates the most beautiful artifact ever made, or artifacts, 3 of them, the Silmarils, mm-hmm. we have to write a whole book about it, because the Noldor go into a complete cycle of tragedy because of their need, desire and need to possess these things. And that is no doubt their Achilles heel. And we see this again in miniature, I think, with the Rings of Power.
Yeah. Okay. In miniature, or in I don't know what that would be, in like Cliff's Notes, in horror, the worst Cliff's Notes possible about it.
That's right.
Okay.
So there's no mention in this chapter of the elves all dying of some sickness, and the Rings of Power is what keep them
so
alive.
here's the thing, right? And that goes to the 3 rings, right? Because they preserve. And so the 3 rings, well, particularly Elrond's and Galadriel's, right? The preservation of their lands was tied to the rings, whereas Círdan gave the Ring of Fire to Gandalf because it would I don't have it highlighted here, but it would help him inspire the people. Thank you. Inspire the people, right? It brought inspiration to those who it interacted with, and maybe through Gandalf, right? That gave him a certain inspiration that he didn't have.
Or it augmented what he already had.
Yeah, it augmented what he already had.
Because we know from his form as a Lord in Valinor that people came to him for inspiration of all kinds.
Right.
He was known to be wise back then.
Yeah, and so the elves, they know, I mean, the weariness of the world is on them, but this here preserves it. The rings preserve just those areas that give them a taste of what, I guess, I don't even want to say it's Valinor, because Valinor is still part of the world, but gives them a feel for what the world was like when it was young, because of the weariness of the world is still on them. But where they are in Rivendell, in Lorien, the world to them still feels young, maybe, even though Lorien is in its autumn, as Tolkien says. But
yes, but I would lean more into the Valinor. I think they do look at Valinor as the height. Mm-hmm. They see it as the height, the Blessed Lands as the height of what is existing.
But this is the thing, right? Some elves
you see this with the Palantiri. and what Gil-galad does with one of the Palantiri. And there's a great quote. I had forgotten that there was an eighth stone. There's a master stone that never sets foot on Middle Earth of the Palantiri. But the elves are always looking to Valinor in the West as, I mean, it's all they got, Jonathan. It's all they got. They have the world, and that's the best part of the world.
I know. So what do we do? This is always the thing with me now. So what do they do about the green elves? What do they do? Like, why? What can they don't have a connection to Valinor, right? They were asked, like, they're elves.
Green elves are just, they're rubes. They're the MAGA elves, okay? They're
rubes?
Yeah, they're
make Middle Earth great again, rubes.
That's right. Yeah, they had their choice. They want to make Middle Earth great, but it's Middle Earth.
So this is the thing, right? This is why, like, I wonder, like, so their weariness of the world, it's not tied to Valinor. It's tied to the weariness of the world because they've never been there. So why would they have a yearning for a place to have a yearning for the sea? That's something that calls to them. But I think that's also because the music of the Ainur is closest to the sound of the waters. But
okay, but let's go with that.
Yeah.
Are you really asking why they have a yearning for the perfection that they've never seen? I would say for the same reason that we in our hearts have a yearning for a perfection we've never seen. We have a yearning for heaven, and it's something we know. We know that perfection exists, but we've never seen it on this earth. And so we're always striving for that ideal in what we desire. And I think the elves do too. It's just their ideal actually exists on the earth, although separated from it in Valinor.
Okay. This is a much longer discussion about whether, like, how the Valar kidnapped the elves to Valinor was actually something that was a good thing in the end. Or what if the elves would have just never have gone? Like, what would
then they would have lived up to their potential.
Why do you say that?
Because their Valinor in the Blessed Realm has the perfection of all life, all the existing state of Arda in its. I mean, the Valar were sent down to perfect Arda, to continue crafting it and make it as great and beautiful a place as possible. They failed in every part except Valinor. And in Valinor, although there was a gap, of course, with the killing of the two trees, in Valinor, it is paradise exists.
Realm, sure, okay.
Paradise exists in Valinor. The elves are creatures of Arda. Their perfection is to live in the place which is most perfected, and like them, by the way, they do not die. They do not. In other words, there's no natural corruption for elves. So the place where they belong, says I, the place where they belong is Valinor.
So your argument would be that since they are tied to the world and they're like what I mentioned before, their desire for perfection in the artistry of the world, right? That is, when you think about Feanor, we think about Celebrimbor. Right? They would tie themselves to their art because they're part of the world. The art is part of the world, and so there's perfection there. And so, the perfect art of the the created world of Arda is only found in Valinor. Meaning, because like Feanor created the jewels, the Valar created Valinor.
Right. And it isn't an accident that Feanor created the jewels, and I would say
that's a very good argument. I buy it. Good job.
Could only create it in Valinor. So some rules couldn't have been created elsewhere. Anyway, that's what Dan's already checked out. He's like, yep.
No, he's not checked out. He's thinking hard.
Just explain that like I'm 5, and I'll get it.
All right.
So it's candy. When you take candy and you put it in
I tried it with the candy explanation. But when you were 5, the greatest place in the world, or one of them, was the McDonald's play place where you got to go and do or Chuck E. Cheese or something like that. And this is the elves' Chuck E. Cheese, and the ball pit is Valinor. Valinor is like the biggest ball pit in the world for the kids.
You sound like a Rings of Power writer. It's like Chuck E. Cheese, Valinor. It's where they go. Look, you know. No.
I'm just giving Jonathan like 18 different possibilities for thumbnails for this episode.
Yeah. All of the animatronics always look up.
Oh my God.
Well done, sir. Well done. Oh man, this is awesome.
How's that going to go with your daughter's thumbnail she's writing for us? If I call it the Valinor, the Chuck E. Cheese of Middle Earth.
Well, I mean, let's get to quick plug. My daughter, who's back for the summer from college, is going to do a few pieces of art for our following for the next few podcasts. And the one she did for this, which you all will have seen because you clicked on it, if on YouTube, if you were actually doing it visually, I'm assuming you weren't just doing the podcast, but is an image of the giving of the ring, one of the rings of power to the Min. So this is one of the kings of Min who gazes upon. And one of the things I really love about her art in this particular case is there are a couple things, but one of them is that on his hand, the ring of power is giving out that unearthly green glow associated. Tolkien says corpse light, which I thought Jackson actually did well in Minas Morgul. I thought that was actually not bad. He says Minas Morgul glows with a corpse light, so the Nazgul's light. They have a light which is like an unlight. It doesn't give off light or comfort, but it does illuminate to a certain extent, so you can see things. So that green glow from his ring of power, which is corrupting him. But notice the reflection of the ring of power in his eye. In his eye, it looks gold. In the real world, it's green, and so he is, and of course you have the wraithifying effect that's beginning in him. So this is my daughter's piece of art to signify, and there's going to be, I won't spoil it, but there's going to be a contrasting image for next week's finish of the Rings of Power chapter, similar to this one, but by contrast. So anyway, it's this giving of the Rings of Power, we should probably read a little bit about that, eh?
Well, I mean, there's two paragraphs that it talks about it.
Right.
Yeah, and like you said, the three were made last, and they were the most powerful, other than the rings of other than the One Ring.
Right. Other than the One Ring.
So, yeah, go ahead.
So 19 rings of the greatest rings. They probably made a lot more, actually. And that's the other thing. Like, if I had made Rings of Power, the show, one of the things I would have done is put a lot of effort into showing the buildup of the land of Eregion and their craft and their building of the Rings of Power. And basically you would end up with like a factory production. There'd be like this was the thing that this realm does, is create all kinds of items of power, and then the rings are the greatest of them. And then you would see the build up to the what ends up being 19 or 16, and then finally 3 of the greatest of the rings. Sauron doesn't have access to them, because as soon as he puts on the One Ring, which he forges in Mordor, the elves immediately perceive him, which pisses him off, because he wanted to, and I quote myself reading Tolkien, to bring them under his vigilance. It's interesting because he's not seeking Sauron isn't under the illusion that the elves are going to be able to be dominated by him. The elves are a little too different. But he does want to be able to watch over them and probably influence them through the rings. But it doesn't work. As soon as he puts on the One Ring, they all perceive. So you got to imagine, there were like 16 elven lords that had these 16 greatest rings that Sauron eventually destroyed Eregion to acquire. I shouldn't say get back. So there could be some cool battle scenes with elves, with what would eventually end up being the 9 rings of men and the 7 rings of the dwarves. They were on elven hands before this, which is a very cool plot point.
And doesn't Gandalf say in the Fellowship, doesn't he say there are many powerful rings and none of them are to be trifled with? Or is that just a movie thing I'm thinking about? There are many powerful rings in the world.
That's a great question.
That is in the movie. I don't know if it's in the book.
Yeah, that's a great question about whether it's in the book.
I'm going to try and find that real quick. Because what you do is like, well, we're practicing with these other sort of much less powerful rings that have certain things imbued into them. You know, whether it's like, the ability to improve your gardening, right? Like your garden grows a little bit greener, or the water boils a little bit fast, like things like that, where it's just like we're trying these things.
The ability to walk on snow.
Stop it.
Yeah, if we were making the movie again, you would see Legolas running off, and on his hand you would see like this glow of a ring. Legolas has one of the old rings of Eregion. Yep, that's exactly right. Thank you, Dan. Thank you.
One thing that struck me when I was reading this, and the only reason I maybe this is my frame of mind when I'm reading Tolkien, is that he has a name for everything that's important, and it's made important by the giving of a name. And when he talks about the 9 men that took the rings, they don't have names. They're just no names. It's like they lose. It's like they lose their identity and they just become the Nazgul.
Exactly.
That's all they are now, and it's very interesting to me.
And since our thumbnail is about one of them, and Dan makes an excellent point about them, let's read about that. Men proved easier to ensnare. So this is after Sauron has gone to war with Eregion, laid waste to the land, claimed the 16 greatest rings back, except for the 3 made last. So he has 16 of the greatest rings of power. Those who used the 9 rings became mighty in their day, kings, sorcerers, and warriors of old. They obtained glory and great wealth, yet it turned to their undoing. They had, as it seemed, unending life. Yet life became unendurable to them. They could walk, if they would, unseen by all eyes in this world beneath the sun, and they could see things in the world invisible to mortal men. And so it goes on from there, and into my favorite sentence about the Nazgul. And they became forever invisible, save to him that wore the ruling ring. And they entered into the realm of shadows. The Nazgul they were, the ring wraiths, the enemy's most terrible servants. Darkness went with them, and they cried with the voices of death. So, by the way, that's just beautiful prose right there. The description of the ring race. The Nazgul they were, the ring race, the enemy's most terrible servants. Darkness went with them, and they cried with the voices of death.
I love that they cried with the voices of death, because you don't have to. They cried shrilly with a high piercing. Right? No. They cried with the voices of death, and that could mean many things to many people. But it's ominous. It's terrifying, and
it's nameless. The namelessness, as Dan rightly points out, the namelessness works perfectly because they became nothing but extensions of Sauron's will by putting on the 9 rings.
So it's interesting too with the 9 rings that he gives to men. It's the thing that they've wanted for this entire book of the Silmarillion. The men come over the mountains and they're like, where's the light, and where do we go to live forever? We don't want to die. And Sauron's able to give them rings and says, here you go. Here's a ring. You'll live forever. And they go, oh, that's what I wanted.
Yeah.
And then it's like this unending death. They're just living forever in this state of like horrible agony.
Yeah.
It's just really interesting.
So cool. So, I mean, tragic, but that's great. That's a good catch, and perfect in Sauron's perfect use. Now, the dwarves don't fall so easily. So Sauron gives 7 of those great 16 rings that he's able to capture from the elves of Eregion to the dwarves. And the dwarves it doesn't go as planned. Doesn't mean that they do well with them like the elves with their 3. But, you were going to say something, Jonathan?
Oh, well... before you get to the dwarves, I want to talk about the 3 a little bit, because the 3, Tolkien writes that they were forged by Celebrimbor alone, and the hand of Sauron never touched them, yet they were also subject to the One. They were subject to the One, but they were worn by Gandalf and Círdan, by Elrond and by Galadriel. What does that mean, they were subject to the One? Because they weren't ensnared by the One like the other rings were.
Nor could he see them.
Nor could he see them, but they were subject to it, and I don't know what that means in here. Whether, well, you know what it means. I guess here's the way: is like once the One Ring was destroyed, they lost their power.
Exactly. That's what I was about to say. Yeah. They're subject in the sense that somehow the knowledge that Sauron gives. Remember, it's the knowledge of the ring craft that ensnares the elves of Eregion. The knowledge that he gives of how to craft the rings of power, but Sauron guided their labors. So that guidance somehow had his sorcery in them. Yeah. So that when they
coaxed his sorcery into the rings. Every time I'm going to use that. I just can't help. Sorry. It's
so bad.
But yes. So some part of him still, like when either he was destroyed or the ring was destroyed. I mean, do they say the ring? Is it written specifically that they lost their power because the ring was destroyed, or because Sauron? Maybe the Sauron and the ring are tied together.
It does say that. I don't have the quote in front of me, but it says like with the loss. They say that with the loss of the one ring, the power of the 3 is gone.
Okay.
And the elves are waning.
Okay, well let's move on then to the dwarves, because I love what he says about the dwarves, because the dwarves, they just live up to their stubbornness. even with these rings.
Yep. So 7 rings he gave to the dwarves. ... I'm going to skip the part about the men. The dwarves indeed proved tough and hard to tame. They ill endure the domination of others, and the thoughts of their hearts are hard to fathom, nor can they be turned to shadows. So fascinating insight. They use their rings only for the getting of wealth.
But it's like we care literally about nothing else. Long life doesn't matter.
Yep.
We just want wealth.
Just one. We want the bling, man.
Yeah.
Give me the bling. But wrath and an overmastering greed of gold were kindled in their hearts, of which evil enough after came to the prophet of Sauron. So it didn't work the way he had hoped, but it did bring about the downfall of the dwarves.
And I think this points to what Dan said is like the what men wanted, they got with their rings. What dwarves wanted, they got with their rings. Right? They wanted more wealth. That was their heart's desire. And for men, their heart's desire was to have eternal life, to live forever. And it met both of them.
Right.
It met their goals.
And I believe, if I remember correctly, Sauron even uses this. Oh, I'm going to read the next sentence and then I'll say it. It is said that the foundation of each of the 7 hordes, that's capital S, capital H, 7 hordes of the dwarf kings of old, was a golden ring. But all those hordes long ago were plundered and the dragons devoured them. And of the 7 rings, some were consumed in fire and some Sauron recovered. So all the dwarven rings were lost. And I believe, and hopefully I'm not remembering an Unfinished Tales thing, but I believe that Glowing at the Council of Elrond says that when the messengers came from Mordor asking about hobbits and asking where the Shire was, essentially where Baggins was, they offered at least one of the dwarven rings back to the dwarves if they would help Sauron in this. Mm-hmm. And so Sauron has some of them anyway, and others were consumed by dragons. There you go. That's the dwarves for you. So fascinating. No, the thoughts of their hearts are hard to fathom, nor can they be turned to shadows. Dwarves are like solid. There's no shadow. Like you can't. You have to smash them like the dragons did. You can't actually entice them away from what they really want.
I just love that. Like he wanted to control them. They're like, nope, gold. Like, nope. Sorry. Like
that's great.
Doesn't matter.
Gold.
Right. So yeah.
You know what? I see your mouth moving, but all I hear is blah 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 gold, blah 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 gold, blah blah blah.
Right. It's pretty. Where can I get more? That's it. Oh, Sauron wants to control me. No, gold. Right. That's all. That's all there is. Hey, I feel like we were going to go further this week into more about the Numenorians and things like that, but I think this is a good place to stop, to just stop with the Rings of Power, because that's such a big deal, and I think maybe we'll split this into 3 parts. Who knows? But there's a lot to talk about. It covers, like we said earlier, it covers so much that that ending with these Rings of Power is a great place to sort of like put a tie in it, put a bow in it, put a bow on it, like tie it up, whatever. I'm mixing all my metaphors as usual. So yeah, it's any other final thoughts on maybe about these Rings of Power, not the other Rings of Power?
Well, I've always loved the idea. Since I was a kid and I first read the Silmarillion when I was a teenager, I loved the idea of visiting the city of Austin, the capital city of Eregion. Yeah. Like, what would it have been like to walk the streets and there's just these Noldorine shops and craft, smithies and jewelry, like they were just the most amazing craft, and they had knowledge and help from the dwarves of Khazad-dûm, next door, not quite as next door as the Rings of Power shows it, but in the land next to them. And it would have been just a wonder. I mean, again, Tolkien's craft in building the lands is and fire is the imagination.
Yeah, I always thought it was interesting that Tolkien chose a ring to be like the symbol, or to be this what would be the right word? It's like an object that's imbued with great power or some kind of spellcraft. And I think from my understanding, he's pulling from other myths that include rings as part of the mythos. And I know he has a translation of Beowulf, and I just read Beowulf recently. And one thing that stuck out to me when I was reading it was that when the kings are described as good kings, it's that they are givers of gifts, and there's always rings involved. And I thought that was really interesting.
Yep.
I don't know if that's a connection that Tolkien had in his mind when he was writing this, but it's really interesting to me. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep. I mean, obviously, his love of the Nordic peoples, of the various Nordic peoples and their mythologies, informs a lot of the background to Middle Earth, and rings are no small part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I just wanted to bring up, this is the image of Austin Ethiel in Rings of Power.
Which I like this image. Like this was one of those moments of like, actually cool.
Again, though, it just suffers from the idea, like we've got this great wide angle, but anything up close, you had no idea what the city was like. Like you didn't experience the city at all. You got postcards and you got rooms. Right?
You got to look out the window and see the furnace be built in like one episode.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Right. What you got was community theater perspective. You got like the shot from inside a small room, unnaturally lit room with weird colors, and you got out the window. You can see this one thing, like Dan was saying,
or you got the video game loading screen right here, and then when you get into it, right, it's like, oh well, the computer's not strong enough to process far beyond this dungeon that we're crawling right now, and that's all we got.
And so then you get the natural progression, and then you get the Gollum game. It's like it's all this natural devolution.
Let's stop. I won't even bring that up anymore. It's not even worth joking about. It's that bad. I mean, if I had to put the Rings of Power and Gollum, I would rather watch the Rings of Power than play Gollum. Honestly, like, there's Gollum. It's so boring. It's like it's I don't know. It's digging a muddy ditch that keeps filling in all the time. It was so bad. Okay. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that.
Some lovely muck.
Some lovely muck. No, nothing lovely about it at all whatsoever. So we're going to jump into our extended podcast right now. We're going to go into is that what? It's a what? It's a what?
Some lovely stuff down here.
Yeah.
Who's that from?
Monty Python.
Monty Python. Holy Grail.
Oh, Holy Grail.
Dennis, the constitutional peasant.
Oh,
right?
yeah. Oh, maybe I can find that clip and throw it in right here. But that would take too much time.
It's just a great scene.
I love that. All right, so we're going to jump into our extended podcast, which, of course, as usual, you can get by becoming a member at thewondering.com/member. And we're going to be talking about why is the Halbrand-Galadriel relationship such a bad idea? Why is it such an issue? Even though Michael defended it in the beginning. Oh, wait.
I did not. Lies. Calumny.
Oh, man. I'm trying to get a couple questions from our Discord members in chat, so we'll see if we get those in time. And then also we can talk a little bit more about why are men so easily swayed. I mean, why we talked about why can't dwarves be turned to shadows because nope, gold. But why, and also why did the elves welcome the Council of Sauron? So, like, we can dive into that a little bit more. Let's talk about that. If you liked our podcast, please give us a review on Apple Podcasts, on Google Podcasts, on Spotify, wherever you go to do it. We would really appreciate it. And yeah, become a member, join us. And I'm going to have some merch shipped to me in the next week or so that I hope it comes into the next podcast because it'll be a lot of fun. I do. They finally, so there was a bug freaking in Teespring that they were like, oh yeah, you can't make hats. They were like, well, sir, we're sorry. We'll let you know in 4 days. And they did, and they finally fixed it. And I could finally order a hat. So it's on the way. Yes. The old Toby. That's a good hat. I need to create something like that too. So anyway, we'll do that. But let's jump into our extended podcast. We'll leave everybody else behind. And we'll see you next week on Exploring Tolkien.
Bye, freeloaders.